Hello, this is Stuart and Michelle Simpson, Catalyst
Hi there.
Ministries. Thanks for joining us as we revisit foundations, particularly looking at revisiting how we do church. In our last time together, we were just talking about how, through the influence of just one or two, a few individuals, hundreds of years ago, we have created a certain liturgy. And for those of us who have been brought up in charismatic churches, certainly as I have, I mean, liturgy is not something, a word that we're familiar with.
No, we think we've got away from liturgy.
We see liturgy very much in more high church structures, but the reality is, even in charismatic churches today, we still have our own liturgies.
There's a very strong
liturgy of an order of service, typically often written down, prepared beforehand, but these have remained largely unchanged for hundreds of years.
Yes.
I mean, we've talked about the Protestant Reformation that was kind of initiated, catalyzed by Martin Luther nearly 500 years ago, and he reformed many things that were happening in what was the Catholic Church.
Yes.
Yeah, this nation
was Catholic. Yes.
If you remember in your history lessons with Henry VIII, when he wanted to divorce one of his wives, but not because she hadn't borne him a son, an heir, that the Pope wouldn't grant a divorce, and so that led to him breaking away from the Catholic Church and then the start of the Protestant Church. And
but with it came all of the stuff from the Catholic Church and from the centuries before.
And Luther, God used to restore some key revelations of salvation by faith alone, justification by faith. But there was a lot of unfinished business and things left not dealt with.
Yes.
New wine still put in old wineskins.
Right.
And when it came to church liturgies and how the church gathered, typically on a Sunday, fundamentally the Catholic liturgy was retained.
Yes.
And with very minor changes. I mean, it was the order of service. I mean, Luther's order of service was
we've got it written
singing,
here.
prayer, sermon, admission to the people, Lord's Supper, singing again, post-communion prayer, and then the benediction. This general outline probably sounds very familiar to you because it's still the typical basis of every Sunday church service found in Protestant churches today. After Luther, John Calvin, another reformer, he pretty much brought the emphasis on leading the service himself, or for the minister, who had replaced the Catholic priest.
Right. Yes.
It's now the Protestant minister or pastor.
Yes.
For him to lead that service from the pulpit, from the front.
Yes.
Again, we may have got rid of the pulpit, but the essence is still there. The one person who is like the MC, the CEO of the Sunday morning church service.
Yes.
Just as the priest was and is the MC and CEO of the Catholic Mass. But this, we need to recognise, is in stark contrast to how the early church in the New Testament, in the book of Acts, met together. It was not that way. So whether we carry on through history with the Puritans, with the Methodists, the revivalists, there were some little changes the Methodists and Revivalists, they gave birth to the altar call, calling people to come forward to the front to receive Jesus. There were small changes that have, or add-ons really, that have taken place over the last so many hundred years.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, that core outline or service, order of service.
Yes.
I mean, I just don't like that word service,
No.
because it just strikes
I don't like it either.
of organisation, of institution, of form.
Yes.
Whereas from what we read in the early church in the book of Acts, they met from house to house. There was life.
They were living the life.
It was more an organic, which is why we hear increasingly new expressions of church, organic church as an organism rather than an
living,
organisation.
breathing. Yes, that's right.
That is made up of living stones, not passive spectators that are just going through form or
Going through the motions.
through the motions week in, week out.
Yes.
And not able to contribute, because they can contribute in singing, and maybe in some church meetings, rarely so, they can maybe speak out publicly in prayer, or even give a prophetic word in the gifts of the Spirit. But even that, in our experience, and we've been to a lot of different churches, over
across the denominations and across
3 continents, in 4 countries, and it's pretty much the same.
Pretty much the same across. Well, it is. The basics
that it
of
is
the service is the same,
and the majority of the body is sat and are in a spectator, primarily a passive mode. Listening to the sermon, and
well, basically we come through a door, and we're maybe met by somebody. Hopefully that person is a smiling somebody and a friendly somebody, and we come in and we find our seats and we sit down, and then somebody starts, the CEO, whatever you want to call him, the pastor or whoever it is, starts the meeting. And we all stand up and we sing something to a worship band, and maybe there is after a couple of the songs towards the end, there may possibly be some exclamations of praise out loud from the congregation, but often not. But there will be some singing in the Spirit, possibly for a minute or even 2. After the final song or the penultimate song,
and the key component of every service is typically the sermon.
And then we have the sermon. With 30 minutes, 40 minutes,
which
or
interestingly is where did that originate from?
Yes.
And we find when we look back in history, it was actually one man, Martin Luther, who established that as being the key. But whereas the Catholic liturgy it revolves around the Mass, in the Protestant liturgy, we do take communion, have the Lord's Supper, maybe once a month or certain times. That's normally tacked on near the end. It's not the main focal point of the gathering, but it has, in Protestant circles, it is very much the sermon, the preaching.
But it came from...
by one individual.
But it came originally from the Greek orators that were around at the time. Christianity was beginning to be transformed, it was beginning to become more institutionalized, and the Greek orators that were around at that time, their whole thing was about speaking. It was about how you speak, how well you speak. It was a whole culture at the time, and people would sit for hours and listen to this one person speaking in this wonderful way about something, but it wasn't something that they contributed to. They just sat and listened, and it was about how well you did your speaking. And what that came down, that was taken on by the church. So it wasn't a scripturally based thing. It was something that was just in non-Christian culture that the Christians then began to take on, and which became popularized, if you like. And therefore it was those who could speak well or speak like the Greek orators that became the ones who were popular.
Those
and
who were
listened to.
ordained,
And they who, yes,
which
that's right.
is another whole issue,
Yeah.
the whole concept of ordination.
Yes, yes.
And you have the priesthood of all believers, and that's...
I think it was Calvin, was it Calvin, that began to call the church building the Mundhaus, or the mouth house. In German it's Mundhaus, which actually translates in English as mouth house. So the church building, the building became the place that you came to hear the orator. It could be a Greek orator. It's the place that you came to hear the orator speak, or to hear the preacher speak, or to hear the pastor speak, or to hear the man of God, who was like the mouth of God.
Well,
and everyone
this
had to come and hear the mouth
reminds me
of
of
God speak.
right back in Exodus, the Old Covenant,
It's Old Covenant, yeah.
where God would speak from Mount Sinai,
Yeah.
and Moses would go up to the mountain and on behalf of the people hear the
God
words
for
of
them.
God.
Yes.
And the people were happy for him to do that.
Yes.
They said, no, you just go.
That's right.
You go and hear God's word.
Yes.
You hear it for us. Find out what God wants to say,
Yes.
and then you come and tell us.
Yes.
And we'll do
Whatever you say.
whatever you say. Well, they didn't many times, but that's what is recorded in the book of Exodus. But the same kind of thing is still in existence today.
Yes.
Where instead of
being encouraged to
the
hear
whole
God for
body
ourselves. Yes.
functioning,
Yes.
we read the previous time from 1 Corinthians 14, where when we come together, when they came together as the early church, the New Testament church, every member had a contribution.
Yes, that's
everyone let everyone function. The whole body
Yes.
was functioning. It wasn't just a hand or a foot that was functioning. The
Yeah.
whole body was active and moving and participating,
Yes.
either through giving a teaching, a song, a word of
Yeah.
encouragement,
A prophecy,
a prophecy or whatever,
Yeah.
which causes the whole body to grow and mature.
Absolutely.
But on the other hand, what we're seeing still today is that a small number of the body are functioning, and the majority are passively listening. Yeah, they're getting more knowledge, more understanding. There is some growth, but if you think your growth is just going to take place on a Sunday meeting, I mean that is so far removed from how we should be functioning as disciples. It's just meeting for an hour or so on a Sunday, one day a week,
Very far removed. Yeah.
is not the radical discipleship that Jesus
No.
called people to.
No.
But he wants every member functioning,
Yeah.
so that under the headship of not man,
Yes.
but Jesus. He's
But
the head of the church.
We're like the Israelites. We're happy to have a king. You know, God didn't actually want them to have a king.
No.
He wanted to be their king. He wanted them to learn. He wanted to empower them as a people, as individuals, and as a community of believers. He wanted to empower them to listen to him, to hear his voice, so that he could lead them successfully. Because he knew that his leadership would be successful leadership. But the Israelites couldn't handle that. They had to have in place a human king. And God advised against it.
They wanted to be like every other nation.
Yeah. They demanded it of God. That they clamoured to have a king. That's what they wanted. And so God, in the end, he let them have a king.
And he warned them actually
He
what
did.
the consequences would be. And interestingly, one of the consequences that he said to them if you want to go down this route, there's a price to pay.
Yeah.
And one is that whoever is appointed king will control you.
That's right. Yeah.
You'll come under their control and authority.
Yeah.
But he wanted to be king.
Yes.
Um,
And of course,
but where man is king, there's always worse.
Well, we're creating problems for ourselves in the church by putting such an emphasis on things being run by one person or two people, or
even a team.
It can even happen with a team, because you often find, and we've found in our experience in some churches, that sometimes teams of people where we think it's a little bit more democratic, that sometimes even teams of people are being controlled by a particular train of thought through one person. For example, in one of the ministries that we were in years ago, they had a team, but that whole team of people were put in place only because they had a certain way of thinking which reflected the way of thinking of the person who was coming up with the ideas. So there was a leader who was hearing from God, as it were, had a particular way of thinking, and had in place leaders, many of whom, if they didn't see things exactly the same way, would still perform things and do things the way that one person wanted. That was then passed down through the team of people to the congregation, and everybody had to do things a certain way, even if it wasn't necessarily scriptural.
Or even if you didn't have peace about it on the inside.
Yes.
Remember back in as early as the 70s, with heavy shepherding, an overemphasis on discipleship and an unbiblical emphasis on spiritual authority.
Yes.
And of course there were extremes and abuses, and also less serious cases, but still an undercurrent. It was a whole teaching.
Oh yeah.
And this is, I mean, for us, we've been through a number of,
we've seen it ourselves
in different places.
Yeah.
And some churches have come out of that whole system.
Yeah.
But
they still retain the
unless
the foundation.
Unless you get right back to the root and dig that out. I mean, you remember not long ago we had to dig out.
We were building a shed.
Here,
yes.
We had to remove this large bamboo
plant. Yeah.
And it had been there for years and years and years. And it's easy to cut it down
it's
to
probably
the
over
to
50
the ground.
years old, that thing.
But to get the roots out
took
a lot of effort.
Yeah.
And you can just cut the bamboo off at the ground level and say, well, we're not following that form of teaching. We're moving away from being overly heavy in shepherding or controlling or authority, and we're now going to be going a different direction. We're wanting to release and empower people, but unless the roots are completely removed,
that bamboo is going to grow.
It's going to start coming out, or like a virus.
Yes.
The virus has to be completely purged.
Yeah.
And renounced and got rid of. Otherwise, it will begin to creep back in. There will
That's
be,
right.
And we've seen that, and that's what God is wanting to address.
Yeah.
In these days,
it's that spirit of it is a spirit of control and a way of doing things that says, this is what Christianity is. You can't do this any other way, and it makes people feel guilty if their Christianity is expressed in a different way to what they've been taught. So if you go away from this, you're either a backslider, or you're talked about, or the church leaders have issues with you, you're a troublemaker, you're rebellious, you're this, you're everything. And so actually what you do is you maintain people's loyalty to the way that you do things. through guilt and condemnation and fear. Because if I go and do things a little differently, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble. I'm going to be called this, I'm going to be that. People are going to perceive me this way. I'm going to be unpopular. I'm going to be perceived as a backslider. And by the time you've gone through all of that, it's kind of not worth the trouble. And so it is going to maintain people's loyalty to a structure and to a system rather than their loyalty to a relationship with the Son of God and with God himself, which has nothing to do with all those structures and forms and ways of doing things, of course. That is a relationship in which we find our own expression, as long as it's, based on the fundamentals of Scripture, virgin birth and believing in Jesus Christ and salvation and walking out the things that God does clearly say to us about loving and the simplicity of the gospel. Yeah, but not all these other trappings. And those things are actually, wittingly or unwittingly, being used, and they're certainly being used by the enemy, to keep a form of loyalty to a church structure through guilt, fear, and condemnation. Now that is serious stuff. And it's destructive. It's destructive to people's relationship with God. There are people coming out of churches because they're finding that this is like a form of abuse. And it's destructive to their lives, to their relationship with God, to their uniqueness and individuality. It's disabling, it's disempowering of who they are and what God is wanting to do through their lives. And there's some people are having to actually leave church as we know it in order to try and find some kind of empowering. Now that grieves my spirit, that grieves my heart, and I know that grieves the heart of God, because the church, the community of believers, should be the most liberating, empowering place you can be on the face of this earth.
Yeah.
And the most appreciative of variety, uniqueness and creativity. It should not be a place which is maintaining people's loyalty through guilt, fear and condemnation. That has to stop.
And the next generation will the survival and the vitality of the future church is wrapped up in this.
Yes. We know that people are leaving. We know that people are crying out from within their hearts for greater authenticity.
These are not people that are going away from God. These are people that are hungry for God and wanting something that they're just not.
They're not getting
receiving.
It in church, which is crazy.
Yeah, much of what we've had as church, God allowed that for a good long time, but the shelf life is coming to an end.
Yeah, it's come to an end.
There are things that he wants to address.
We've been in so many church meetings. I mean, if you've been a believer for any length of time and you start adding up how many meetings you've been to, how many church meetings you've been to, if you think you're going every Sunday, once on a Sunday, and you begin to add that up over the years. We'll do that in another chat. We'll look at that. That's a lot. It's a lot of meetings, and I have to say, we have been not only to a lot of meetings over your 40-something years, or 40 years as a believer, and over my 26 years as a believer. We've been to a lot of meetings, but not only have we been to a lot in quantity, we've been to a lot in a lot of different places, across a lot of different denominations, a lot of different kinds of people. But fundamentally, foundationally, every single one of those meetings is the same. Okay, strip away a little change here and a little change there. The foundation, the basics are always the same. And I have to admit to you that I am bored of the same old thing. And I, personally, I think God is bored too. And how many of us, we're so polite, especially the British, I mean, you know, you can be very polite, especially the English, you know. We have to say the right thing and make people feel everything is okay, and we don't always want to express how we really feel. How many people are there really who in their heart of hearts have to say that Sunday morning meetings, horror of horrors, you know, because people might think I'm backslidden if I feel this way or if I say this. How many people are there really who feel bored of Sunday morning meetings and the way that they're run?
An anonymous survey, it'd be an interesting study.
It would be very interesting. You know, I sat next to a young person in a church Sunday morning church meeting just
the other day. And at the end of the time together, and I call it a time together, but we know these are not really times together, because the idea of being together in the in the early church was for mutual edification and encouragement, and we all bring that to each other by having mutual contribution, real fellowship. Of course, we don't get that on a Sunday morning at a Sunday morning meeting, not in the true sense at all. Not ministering to each other. No.
And this young person said to me at the end of the service, I have never been so lulled to sleep in my life. This is a young person at the end of a church meeting.
Yeah.
A charismatic church meeting, and said to me, please do something for the sake of my generation and the next. And I quote, that's exactly what they said. Please do something for the sake of my generation and the next. If church continues like this, people will just not come. It will die. And that will be good, because it needs to die.
My goodness.
That is a prophetic insight from a young person. And we need to take that seriously. God takes it seriously. And we need to take it seriously. Things have got to change, and we are going to have to.
We'll pick it up next time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for
Thanks
listening.
for joining us.
Bye.